Alright, in the following tutorial what I'm going to do is create Photoshop graphics for my Premiere project file. So the very first thing that we need to do is design the graphic in Photoshop. So when I go to Photoshop and create a new file, what's important to understand is that there are templates for video that are already in Photoshop, and you do want to use those. You don't want to just go ahead and open up your file and change it to 720 by 480. So if I go over to the film and video sizes, you'll see that there's some presets there, and you want to make sure that the preset you use is the same preset as your Premiere project file so that they match. I'm going to use the NTSC DV widescreen, so it gives me my 720 by 480, and it even shows me at the bottom that I'm going to be using pixel aspect ratio correction of 1.21. So let's click OK, and it comes up with a warning that says, by the way, it's for preview purposes only. And so you'll see that it's kind of stretched out. If I wanted to see it without pixel aspect ratio correction, I can go up to View, turn that off, and you'll see it kind of looks 4 by 3 now, because now what they're showing us is square pixels, which means that our Photoshop document will look better here than it will when we have it stretched out. And the reason why is because this is showing us non-square pixels in a square pixel environment. So you might see some banding and other things, and we'll see that when we actually look at our graphics. Now I've got white in the background. I'm going to go ahead and just fill that with black so I have a background layer which is black. And I need to find the images that I'm going to bring in. So I'm going to go to the folder where I have my footage items, my photos here. Might just double click on these until I find an image that I really like to use. I think the Taj Mahal is probably one of the most important icons of India that we know, so that's a great image to use. So I'm going to take that thumbnail, click on it, go over to Photoshop, drag it in and drop. And so now it's just moved that photo over to Photoshop for me pretty easily from XInView or anything that you can drag and drop. To move this into my file, we could go up to our image size and just check what size we have right now, and you'll notice that we are much larger than 720 by 480. Now, even though it'd be smart for us to bring in larger images into Photoshop and actually not do all these graphics in Photoshop like we're going to do, we're going to actually pull this into Photoshop, which means that our file is going to go down to the size of 720 by 480. So it's probably a good idea before we import this into our Photoshop document to rescale it down to the size that we need. So I'll just do 720, and it's now 540. And 720 by 540, by the way, is the square pixel version of your regular NTSC video or NTSC DV. Because if we scaled this to the right pixel aspect ratio correction of 0.9, it would now be 720 by 486. So anyway, I'm going to select all this with Control C or Control A, Control C. Then I can paste it into my document. And here's one of those problems. Notice that it looks kind of weird. And this is why dealing with pixel aspect ratio corrections and stuff is kind of strange. You'll notice that I made it 720 by 480 or 720 by 540. I pasted it into here and it did all sorts of wacky things on me. And now it's actually not the right width and stuff. So it's kind of crazy sometimes dealing with the differences between the applications. So I might turn that off, paste it in. You'll notice it definitely looks weird. So instead, I've often done this. I'm going to undo that. Let's see, make sure that I get to the right size. Image size. Oh, I guess it's already done the image size. There we go. Image size. I'm going to make it something like 800. Even 880 is fine. Now I'm going to copy it, paste it in, just make it a little bit larger so that I have a little bit more room to move things That's what I typically do. You'll see it's not perfect, but I could then go and try and scale things a little bit. If I go to the View Pixel Aspect Ratio Correction, this is what it should actually look like. And so we can see a little bit better about how it's going to fit in our file. And now that I have it a little bit larger, it also gives me the ability to nudge it around and get it to fit a little bit better than just going to the image and cutting it down to size. I just wouldn't want to bring in something that's 1600 pixels wide because it'd be huge and then it'd be hard to move around. So I'll bring it in at a smaller size and then or a little bit larger size and move it as I need. Okay, so now I can really look at this and say I'm going to definitely put my banner over the bottom. So I'm going to create my banner, and I should probably give this a name. That'll be the Taj. And I'm going to create a new layer for my banner. And I don't like the vector stuff a whole lot, so I typically create the section that I want here and then fill it with color. And I might even fill it with white. And this will be my banner. And then just to see what it looks like, I'll change my opacity somewhat. I could even do things like add a drop shadow to it, possibly, just to see what that looks like. So there's my banner and how that might composite in there. And now I need my text. Travels to India. Of course, right now it's not very exciting, so let's see if we can find a font that might be a little bit nicer. And let's make it much larger. Now, notice that if I'm looking at this thing right now, it's at 67%. There we go. Now it's at 100%. If you look at that text, do you know how, can you tell how kind of grungy the text looks? That's because of that pixel aspect ratio correction. So I'll go to View, turn that off, and the text looks better, but now it looks really strange. Now it looks really squished down. So this is one of those things that you have to get used to when you're developing graphics, especially in Photoshop, for video. They're not going to necessarily look the way that you expect them to, but they'll look fine when you bring them into your video environment. So here's my text, and one of the things that I wanted to point out with this particular logo is that in general you're going to want to use text that has thicker lines and heavier fonts. And the reason why is because just with that problem right there with you saw scaling the text or changing between the different pixel aspect ratio corrections is you don't have a lot of resolution in video. And so when you have really thin lines in video and they're not exactly at the right spot, things will look kind of funky and blurry. So in order to make our lines not have those kind of artifacts, we tend to want to have heavier lines. So in this case, I'm going to try and find a font that actually is a little bit heavier. Playbill, maybe not so good. That's a little bit more, what is it? Travels to India, not a great font. That looks fine. That's a nice, heavy, bold font that I can do a lot of different things with. Now, it could be that it would be awesome if we had some sort of Indian type font or something like that. And of course, that would be cool. But I'm not going to really worry too much about it. I'm going to actually change some of my ideas here. I'm going to have that be here, and my text, I think, be underneath. Give that a nice drop shadow as well. Could be that we want to use a different color than this, or maybe we might look at it that going to the top, maybe even in the center. A lot of things that you can do, but you definitely want to beef up the size of your text. I'm actually going to cut off, that would actually work pretty well too. I'm cutting off this line of all the dark stuff, which would be kind of interesting. And now I can put some text at the bottom, which is, whoops, I didn't really mean to make a new text layer or a new layer. I just want a new text layer. Hosted by Jonathan Ross. Let's see if I can find Berlin Sands. Doesn't look like there's a really good one, so maybe we'll go with some black text. Definitely not the best looking font there. That just seems really bold, don't you think? We'll go with that. Now we've got these lines down here as well, and I want to talk about those lines. One of the things that you see when you're working on video applications is you see these double sets of lines. The ones on the outside are what are considered action safe areas, and the ones on the inside are what are considered title safe. And you typically find your titles need to be inside the region. You wouldn't want the text to be all the way at the top. Now, if you know that you're designing things only for web-based video, not for like TV or anything, then you can have graphics that can be seen as they go all the way to the edge. But typically on TVs, they won't go all the way to the edge. So that's just something to be aware of. This is not the most beautiful design in the world, but at least it gets some idea of what you can do graphically in Photoshop. And you want to design elements that you think will be able to be easily animated. And you'll notice with this banner, I allowed myself to have a little bit more room than I'm actually seeing, because I could have this banner moved a lot of different places, and it can kind of come up, or maybe you could travel across the entire thing down to the bottom and settle where it's supposed to, and it gives me a little bit more room to work with when it's a little bit wider versus a really thin one. So anyway, there's my final graphic that I've created. So I'm going to save this as a Photoshop document in the same folder that I have everything else. So this will be my travels graphic, and I am going to save it as a Photoshop document. Now in the next tutorial, what I'm going to do is actually animate it in Premiere.